Well, welcome to the book of Lamentations. This is the next book in our series after finishing the book of Jeremiah. This book was written by Jeremiah. These are kind of the thoughts and ideas of Jeremiah as he is dealing with the aftermath of the destruction of Jerusalem, basically. In fact, the title of Lamentations in the Hebrew Bible is a Hebrew word translated how, which is the first word of Lamentations and begins chapters 2 and 4 as well. This term is an exclamation of how much Jerusalem has suffered. Although the suffering is overwhelming, the author pours out his heart beautifully. The book of Lamentations is structured in 5 poems which align with the 5 chapters in our English Bible. The first 4 poems are acrostics, that is, each new line begins with the next letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Lamentations is a eulogy for the death of the kingdom of Judah, which has been taken away into exile. The situation is stark and bleak, yet there is hope in God, whose mercies are new every morning. He is the faithful and compassionate one who forgets not his people, even as they suffer justly for what they have done. So that's out of from the Gospel Coalition website, basically, gospelcoalition.org. So in the name Lamentations, this is a translation of the Greek, basically. Threnoi is a Septuagint's title in the book. In the Hebrew Bible, it is named the initial word eka, or how, as in how lonely sits the city. So if you look in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, the NRSV, it'll say how lonely sits the city, basically. So that's in verse 1, it'll say that. Now, Keil and Delitzsch concluded something that's interesting about this book as well. They, after an exhaustive examination of the arguments against Jeremiah's authorship, that the tradition which ascribes the Lamentations to the prophet Jeremiah as their author is as well-founded as any historical tradition whatsoever. So some scholars tried to say, no, Jeremiah didn't write this. This was written by some scribe later, and they just put Jeremiah's name on it. But what Keil and Delitzsch said is they really did the research, and they says, no, we really think Jeremiah actually did write this. So now, Jeremiah didn't go to Babylon into exile. Jeremiah was left, he almost did, but then he was left in around Jerusalem, and then he ended up going with a lot of the people to Egypt. And then he was over there for a while too. So this is Jeremiah's musings. These are poems that Jeremiah put together to lament the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the king of Judah and things like that. So really interesting, we're going to see here. Now, as far as for our LDS watchers, this wasn't changed much in the Joseph Smith translation. He didn't do much changing to Lamentations. He left this one mostly alone. So no revisions, basically. So think of this. So we look at verse 1. How doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? If you think about this is like Jeremiah going, this great metropolis used to be a bustling city and now it's empty. You know, he's lamenting the destruction. Oh my gosh, this city used to be amazing and now it's nothing. She that was great among the nations and princes among the provinces, how is she become tributary? So this is, it's common, one thing, for these kinds of poems and lamentations to happen. These are Jeremiah's of Jerusalem. So now he's going, this used to be a mighty city and now it's a vassal state of another nation. It has fallen, it's destroyed. How far has this gone? Verse 2, she weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. So again, this metaphor is coming forward of a woman or a bride who had a husband and then wanted to spend her time dealing with other men. So she went out and played the prostitute and slept with other men, and even got to the point where she paid other men to sleep with her because she wanted to have sex so much. But then she got destroyed. Her wanted a divorce from her husband. Her husband's finally like, I don't want to divorce you, but fine, if that's what you want, I'll let you have it. And that's when the destruction happened. And even her friends wouldn't help her. They turned into her enemies, basically. When she had nothing to give them, they turned their backs on her, basically. They only saw her as value to them, not as trying to help her out. That's that Master Mahan principle on a very large scale right there. Verse 3, Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction. Now, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, says Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. So kind of a change on this beginning of verse 3. Because it says, because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits. So now many nations make up what would be called the heathen nation. These are lots of different nations. So they saw heathen as nations other than them. If you were part of Israel, you were not a heathen. If you were not part of Israel, you were a heathen, basically. And then at the end here, all her persecutors overtook her between the straits. Again, the NRSV has a more clear translation of this, and it says, in the midst of her distress. So in the midst of all the distress that she was dealing with, her persecutors took advantage of her and wiped her out, basically. Verse 4, the ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feasts. So there's no people left to attend the ritual feasts that they do throughout the year. All her gates are desolate. Her priests sigh. Her virgins are afflicted. She is in bitterness. So the people aren't bustling around. They're not doing commerce. They're not busy in the city anymore, basically. The gates are desolate. People aren't coming and going for commerce and travel and things. The artisans are carted off. There's no religion anymore. It's all gone. Verse 5, her adversaries are the chief. Her enemies prosper. For the Lord hath afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children are gone into captivity before the enemy. Now, Babylon, as well as other countries that raid the area since Jerusalem has no wall of protection. That's what he's talking about. Her adversaries are the chief. Her enemies prosper. There's nothing they can do about it. Babylon destroyed them. The other end, the ones they thought were their friends are raiding them, taking their value out of them. Again, this Master Mahan principle on a huge, grand scale. This is painting a heck of a picture of this destruction, how bad this destruction was. And if you haven't gone through the book of Jeremiah yet, if this is the first time you're getting into this, you might be first realizing how bad this was. Go through our book of Jeremiah videos and you'll get into it was bad. This was really bad destruction. Let's see, verse 6. And from the daughter of Zion, all her beauty is departed. Her princes are become like harts. That would be like stags that find no pasture. So like deer, they can't find any pasture. They are gone without strength before the pursuer. So if there's deer and there's no pasture for them, they flee. They leave and get out of the area to go find a better place to have pasture. So their strength is gone. Basically, they're looking for other places to find strength. Verse 7, Jerusalem remembered in the days of her affliction and of her miseries all her pleasant things that she had in the days of old when her people fell into the hand of the enemy, and none did help her. The adversary saw her and did mock at her Sabbaths. So that's dealing with her religious observances on the Sabbaths. They are mocking Jerusalem and how bad she's destroyed. Verse 8, Jerusalem hath grievously sinned. Therefore she is removed. All that honored her despise her, because they have seen her nakedness. Yea, she sigheth and turneth backwards. So you could think of a woman who used to be great, but she played the harlot. And what they would do sometimes, if a woman was caught in adultery and found this way, they would take her to the public square in front of everybody and strip her naked, which would shame her in front of everybody. It's kind of like, you've slept around, so we're going to let everybody see your naked body. So she's ashamed, turning away from them to hide her body so they can just see her back, basically. And they're laughing at her. They're despising her. So that's what Jerusalem has turned into. The city wall is gone. The city's destroyed. Lots of people dead. Lots of all the wealthy, the famous, the craftsmen, the artisan, the good workers are all carted to Babylon. The all abject poor are left to pick up the pieces. There's nothing left. And all the cities around are just going, man, Jerusalem's nothing now, basically. Verse 9, her filthiness is in her skirts. She remembereth not her last end. Now the NRSV says here, her uncleanness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. So when you think of this uncleanness in her skirts, you could think of the filthiness. She slept around, basically, and she didn't think of the future. She thought of only the next trick, basically, the next person. Therefore she came down wonderfully. She had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy hath magnified himself. So that's how they're equating Jerusalem to this, basically. So if you think about this, and it'd be interesting to hear, ladies, if you have any thoughts on this, what would it be like if you were paraded around among all of your friends and community, as you were paraded, forced to be naked, everybody could see you, you were exposed as an adulterer, you slept around, you were this way. How would you feel? Like, how would you feel about yourself? That shame, that guilt, things maybe you'd feel in yourself of being in that situation. That's kind of what Jerusalem, how they're thinking about Jerusalem, basically, at this time. Verse 10, the adversary has spread out his hand upon all her pleasant things. For she hath seen that the heathen entered into her sanctuary, whom thou didst command that they should not enter into thy congregation. Here's kind of an interesting idea. So this is obviously literally talking about the desecration of the temple of God, that they have entered into the sanctuary where they shouldn't be. But we could read into this if we look at this metaphor of this woman who has willingly given herself out to other people, and now her enemy has basically taken her value from her. She is being sexually assaulted and raped, basically. Her value is taken from her by her enemies, basically. So if we look at this from a literal standpoint, this is basically the people are starving to death during this siege of Jerusalem. All the valuable stuff's been taken. The crops have been destroyed. I mean, the people that were left were in abject poverty during the good times of Jerusalem. They didn't own land. They didn't have jobs. They didn't do things. They were just homeless. They lived on the streets. They struggled even under a good economy. And now there's nothing. And they have to try to figure out how to make a living out of this, basically. So that's this destruction that was in. Now, verse 11, all her people sigh. They seek bread. They have given their pleasant things for meat to relieve the soul. So there, again, pleasant things are this allusion to precious vessels, to doing these things. And they say, see, O Lord, and consider, for I am become vile. So the idea here is they knew they shouldn't sell the precious things. They shouldn't sell themselves. They shouldn't sell their gold and silvers and things like that. But they needed to eat. And so they did whatever they could to eat because they were starving to death. This is the challenge of these people as they try to pick up their lives again, basically. Verse 12, is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by? So kind of saying, asking people who are passing by the area to see the results, have you ever seen suffering worse than ours? Behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow, which is done unto me, wherewith the Lord hath afflicted me in the days of his fierce anger. So they realize this destruction is caused by God. We weren't following our God, we were following everybody else's God, and our God is the one we should have followed. And now we chose not to follow him, and now we're suffering the consequences of that, basically. Verse 13, from above hath he sent fire into my bones, and it prevaileth against them. So this is like a metaphor of affliction. He has spread a net for my feet. He hath turned me back. He hath made me desolate and faint all the day. The yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. So you think of the yoke around the neck of people, basically. This was used in Isaiah's descriptions as well, if you remember. Jeremiah talked about it as well. So they are wreathed and come upon my neck, and hath made my strength to fall. The Lord hath delivered me into their hands, from whom I am not able to rise up. Now, according to the interpretation of this given the Doctrine and Covenants in section 113, verse 10, the bands on Israel's neck are the curses of God upon her, or the remnants of Israel in their scattered condition among the Gentiles. This is Judah's 70-year captivity in Babylon, was described like a yoke over them, basically. So that's coming from the Old Testament study manual, where we're learning this. Now, in the NRSV, here at the end of verse 14, where it says, from whom I am not able to rise up, and this whole idea of the transgressions are the yoke, the NRSV version says, my transgressions were bound into a yoke, and by his hand they were fastened together. They weigh on my neck, sapping my strength. The Lord handed me over to those whom I cannot withstand. So think of the idea of the results of my sins are put on this, are wrapped around me like chains or like a yoke. Think of the idea of A Christmas Carol, when Marley and Marley come back to haunt Ebenezer Scrooge before the three spirits appear. They have all those chains around them. Those are the chains they forged in life. All the mean and cruel things they did to people built them the chains of sin that result in that constriction of problems. That's kind of the same idea as what Jeremiah is trying to position about Jerusalem has the yoke on them that makes it hard. They're pulling, they're tied to something. If you got a yoke on, you're usually connected like the you'd have your oxen yoked together and then connected to a wagon to pull the wagon. And so they're yoked, they're having to be a servant to others, miserable life, hard labor, lots of problems, and they can't revolt against their captors, basically, which is Babylon. So verse 15, continuing on here, the Lord hath trodden underfoot all my mighty men in the midst of me, and he hath called an assembly against me to crush my young men. So you think about this as the mighty men, the warriors, basically. So they've crushed my young men. The Lord hath trodden the virgin, the daughter of Judah, as in a winepress. So God let Babylon march all over the people. Just like in the winepress, you have the place, they put all the grapes, and people get in there with their bare feet, stomp on the grapes to press them, to get all the juices out of them. This is kind of what happened when Babylon just marched over the people and trampled them and killed a lot of people. Verse 16, for these things I weep mine eye runneth down with water, because the comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. My children are desolate, because the enemy prevailed. This is kind of as if Jerusalem, this woman is speaking. I had all these children, they're gone from me. All my friends have turned against me. I've been ashamed and exposed. This, woe is me, kind of an idea. Verse 17, Zion spreadeth forth her hands, and there is none to comfort her. The Lord hath commanded concerning Jacob that his adversary should be round about him. Jerusalem is as a menstruous woman among them. So this is meaning an unclean and filthy person among the nations. So we can even look in earlier when it talked about the uncleanness of her skirts would be fit with the same idea of menstruation. So back then, they saw this idea of when a woman had her period and was menstruating, that they didn't have the modern stuff they had today. You just had to carry a towel, like a hand towel with you, and you'd have to keep wiping and cleaning yourself up so it didn't make a mess everywhere, and it'd get all over your clothes and things. They saw that any type of cuts, wounds, blood coming out of you as unclean, and you had to go through ritual processes. So women, literally, like 1 week out of a month, would have to go to a special house and just hang out until their body was done, and then they could do the cleansing and go meet the priest and make sure they're ritually cleansed and they're clean again, and then they can go back to society. And it's nice we don't do that today. Could you imagine that if we still live that way today? That's just crazy. So verse 18, the Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. So think of Jerusalem, this woman who's admitting this. The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow. So learn from my misery. My virgins and my young men are gone into captivity. I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and mine elders gave up the ghost in the city, while they sought their meat to relieve their souls. So again, everybody turned against me. They went everyone against themselves, and they turned against me. Verse 20, behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled. Mine heart is turned within me, for I have grievously rebelled. Abroad the sword bereaveth. So in the street is what you could say instead of abroad. In the street the sword bereaveth. At home there is as death. So Babylon marching through, destroying people in the streets. They have heard that I sigh. There is none to comfort me. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that thou hast done it. Thou wilt bring the day that thou hast called, and they shall be like unto me. Let all their wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me for all my transgressions. For my sighs are many, and my heart is faint. So Jerusalem is hoping karma comes around to my destructors, and they get destroyed too. Basically, that's happened. We saw in the last couple of chapters of Jeremiah. So these are the Lamentations. That's the first poem of Jeremiah. Let's turn to the next one as we continue forward.